Well, hey guys, welcome back to the Dr. Jockers Functional Nutrition Podcast. I'm excited about today's interview. We've got Dr. Anthony Gustin. And if you guys haven't heard of Perfect Keto, it is a fast growing brand. They've got some phenomenal products. In fact, if you've listened to my podcast for any time, you've heard of them because I talk all about the bars and the cookies, which are amazing. So we're going to go into that. But Dr. Anthony Gustin has a similar background as me. He was trained as a chiropractor, had a sports rehab clinic or multiple clinics with sports that specialize in sports rehab. He had that in California. He also is trained in functional medicine. He's run labs on hundreds of different clients over the years. And he pivoted and started a supplement company called Equip Foods, and also a great food company in the keto space called Perfect Keto. And he also is the host of the Natural State podcast, and also wrote a great book called Keto Answers. And we'll talk all about that in today's interview. So Dr. Gustin, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Doc. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk about your story, how you got into functional nutrition, functional medicine.
Yeah. Things that I wanted to get into chiro in the first place was that I was just really sick when I was younger. I was really overweight. I grew up in the Midwest in Minnesota, and like anybody else who's there, even right now or 20 years ago, can attest to, people don't eat real food. They don't move a lot. It's a really weird culture. And my family doesn't like really eat anything active. We're just eating hot dish, weird things, lots of packaged food, and got really overweight. That made me really unathletic, made my joints hurt. Sort of turned things around, I think more for vanity reasons than anything when I was younger. Just wanted to not be made fun of, but had really bad acne, had gut problems, all this stuff, and would see all these different doctors and nobody would be able to help me. And it was really, really frustrating. I got this weird laser treatment for my face, it hurt, it was really expensive, did all these different medications, nothing really worked. So I started basically figuring out how can I become healthier as a person, and started reading and digging into chemistry and physiology textbooks when I was in high school and started figuring a lot of this stuff myself. Then I was still having some like lingering joint pain, knee pain. I was trying to be more athletic, and I saw a sports med chiro in central Minnesota and realized like, oh wow, like you can help people in a preventative way. I always had we had a bunch of family friends who were physicians and orthopedic surgeons, and sort of like I was thinking about going down that route, but I was advised after someone's broken, you need to put them back together and basically have no intervention. And so I was much more of a fan of the route going down and working with athletes and sort of helping people with physical pain. So sort of like fast tracked, knew that's what I wanted to do. Fast tracked through undergrad. And then in chiro school, I went to Western States, and they offered a dual degree program. So I got my master's and doctorate at the same time. Master's in sports rehab, doctorate in chiropractic, obviously. And then graduated on a Friday, and on Monday, opened up my clinics in San Francisco. And so that was it's just been like this pace my entire life, which we can get into. I wouldn't recommend a lot of other people to do that. But yeah, it was amazing. And we scaled the clinic from 1 to 6 locations in 3 years. And I just found out that healing people and fixing people from physical pain in their body is actually pretty easy. There's only so many things that can go wrong with physical injury. So I started getting into more functional medicine and helping people with gut issues, diabetes, obesity, metabolic dysfunction, et cetera, which was way more difficult and I think way more nuanced. But I sort of saw a trend with both of these things that, if nutrition, which I since high school, when I figured out how important it was for myself, if that wasn't dialed in, whether it was an NFL player, all pro wide receiver, or if it was sort of an obese grandmother, it doesn't really matter. You have to sort of have these building blocks. And since then, I've sort of expanded my way of thinking about health, sort of started in nutrition first, then sort of added in okay, that's a big one, a big pillar. Movement's really important. Stress management is really important. Community, meaning, purpose, et cetera. Sleep, all these things sort of play a vital role. And if you ignore all of these things, you're never going to have somebody be healthy. So I started writing about a lot of stuff and had a website that took off. And I realized what the internet was and how you could reach people while you were sleeping is crazy. I mean, I think that living in San Francisco, there's everybody around me, but I didn't really understand the power of just putting yourself out there online until I was in my clinics. And so after that, I basically tried to use products as a way to convince people that what they put in their body mattered. And so that's where Equip came from originally. So I still make clinics, and I was seeing a lot of my high-end athletes taking these just ridiculous pre-workout supplements. And they had all these crazy fillers, additives. They were, way too much caffeine. They were feeling all jittery afterwards, have gut problems from them. And so we developed one that was effective dosing as well as no weird stuff in it. And so we started with that product, was writing a lot of content with it, and then just expanded from there, making grass-fed beef protein, sweet potato powder, greens powder, things like that. Trying to educate people that, hey, no matter what you put in your body, you should be using real food ingredients, be getting as close to the source as possible, but also recognizing that, and this is a big thing too, like around both of the companies, people think that I'm just some guy trying to shuck processed foods, even though I say you should eat real foods. Like fundamentally, I believe that everybody should be eating as much local, seasonal food they can possibly get, food that spoils, food that you can put on your counter and that you can't eat it in a couple of weeks. But there was a bridge from where I was as a fat, sick 15-year-old in Minnesota to where I am now, hunting most of my own food as far as animal products and going to farmers markets, things like that here in Texas. There's a long, long bridge to get from point A to point Z there. I think it's a never-ending journey, but what people don't realize is that people need to start swapping stuff out, and very few people have the capacity. There's so much stuff going on in their lives, but otherwise, there's so many decisions to make in a day, where going from eating a processed standard American diet to just eating local seasonal foods is really, really challenging. And so creating a bridge not only of content and education, but also of products that sort of people can start swapping things out. And the supplements, use supplementally, not as replacements. And then the food products is sort of like in a pinch. I use them as well if I'm traveling, things like that. I just need a quick snack. But yeah, of course, I think people should be eating real food. So that was launched, and it was starting to scale that. Then it was taking off. It grew bigger than my clinic. And I realized that sort of I was able to help people while I was sleeping, which was really rewarding. And blog was getting traffic. All this stuff was sort of taking off. And I realized, I did some math. I did a monthly retreat all the time, and sort of I still do like reassess where I'm at in my life, where am I going, what's important, what do I want to work on, is this working, is this not working, and did some sort of back of the napkin math. I'm like, okay, if I stay in my clinic, even if I scale to 50 locations, I can only have like a couple of tens of thousands of people in my lifetime as a clinician, even if I had this like giant clinic practice. And then realize like, oh, if I just put in a little more effort here, I could eclipse that in a year. Like I could have maybe not as deep of an interaction as a clinician as with the patient, but we could have way more interactions with people. And that turned out to be true. We've had over 100 million page views on Perfect Keto, for example, which is all educational content for a ketogenic diet, which there's no way I would be able to touch that many people if I was stayed in my practice. So as I left and started working on Equip more, I always wanted to do something in the ketogenic space, and there just wasn't the right products available, the right things. And sort of before it got popular with Joe Rogan and Tim Ferriss and some of these big names, and like the sort of fringe health stuff started putting out things in keto, we actually developed a product. It was the second ever exogenous ketone. The first one was, in my opinion, really bad tasting. It was extremely expensive, so it wasn't really accessible for a lot of people. It was like $95 for 10 servings or 15 servings. And the branding and everything was just terrible. So people, I don't know, I think that when you see it, it looked like a scam to me.
Yeah.
Like I was really skeptical to use it for the first time. And there was also a big white space around content. I would Google stuff and try to send my patients articles. Sometimes I would write them myself. Sometimes I would try to find them online. And this time, 2016, there was no information on the internet like that was in a consolidated source about keto. Like Peter Attia had some blogs that you sort of have to have a doctorate degree to understand what he's saying. And some other people, like I think Ben Greenfield's putting out some stuff like really early on, but there wasn't a lot of like, okay, you can go to here for the education piece. And what I saw in my clinic, which I was using ketogenic diet for a couple of years already, in either high performers or people who had metabolic dysfunction, things like that, that if you didn't have a compliance of knowing what foods to switch out and making it easy that way, but also the education and sort of a trusted source, nobody stuck to it. And like the people that I handheld the entire time were the ones that did really, really well. Mm-hmm. So I sort of thought like, okay, how can I mimic that with our content system? And how can we basically use the product sales to hire an amazing research and content team to be able to put out all these resources for people. Yep. So that way there's a spot to go to. Obviously now things looking back are very different, and there's a lot of resources online. There's a lot of really good ones. But that gap sort of existed in the marketplace before. And yeah, it was a crazy ride since then. We launched that in 2016. And just been sort of working on that day to day since then.
And when did you graduate from college? When did you graduate from Western States?
It was in 2012.
Yeah, so you have an incredible work ethic and you're a big thinker, that's for sure.
Yeah,
I graduated, yeah,
obsession and compulsion than anything.
yeah. I graduated in the end of 2008. Now, a similar story. I opened my clinic, and this was right when the economy had crashed. So I couldn't get a business loan. So I opened it on credit cards. Lived in my clinic actually for 2 years. I was single and showered across the street at a 24-hour gym, right? Got my clinic successful, got out of debt, right? And then, then I got online pretty early. I was writing for other websites and then created my website, and it kind of took off. And, I started writing articles on ketogenic diet and doing interviews around 2014, 2015 as well, early on. And I saw you guys, I saw Perfect Keto just kind of rise, putting out really great content. So I've always appreciated what you guys have done. And let's talk a little bit about keto. And most of my listeners have heard of it. They kind of know what it is, but let's talk about it from a functional nutrition, functional medicine perspective. I know you look at it as a tool. So do I. It's not just, a diet everybody needs to be on all the time, but instead it's a tool. And what are the benefits that somebody can get from being in ketosis?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends what the goal is for the person. Like you said, it's just a tool. And I think tools should be used very specifically and intentionally and not over applied for a long period of time. So I think a lot of people they maybe see, the most common thing right now is with all health stuff is generally fat loss and weight loss. And so it's like a very, very good tool for that. We can talk about why this is and how it can and cannot be effective. But I think that mostly so many people just overeat processed food. I did the same thing when I was younger, got really overweight, stopped doing that, and became not overweight. And so when you just terrorize your metabolic system with not only refined carbohydrates, but refined seed oils as well, so vegetable oils, as other people will call them. I don't like to give them that amount of credit.
Yeah.
Call them vegetable oils. But you do these two things in conjunction, you basically create this cascade of inflammation that destroys your entire metabolism. And what happens is you go so far one way that sometimes you need some really aggressive tools. And I think ketosis can be sort of aggressive sometimes for people. Not all cultures have done it in the past. And there's sort of a lot of pushback publicly about people saying oh, this is unsustainable, this is whatever. It really just depends on the person and what they need. So for example, if I go outside and I trip and fall and sprain my ankle, okay, I can sort of get back to normal within 8, 10, 12 weeks, maybe a little bit sooner, maybe a little bit longer, depending on my status. If I go out and a bus runs over my ankle, I may never walk the same again. I may need to sort of modify my movement indefinitely to cope for that injury. And the same thing I think about people's insides as well, is that sometimes the damage is so extreme that you need to have sort of an artificial or sort of a counterexample of how you address that. And it may be indefinite. And that's sort of how I think about applying the tools. But we've seen now, I'm sure you guys have covered on the podcast and through tons of articles, all the research about all the different ways that a ketogenic diet can help beyond just fat loss. Virta is doing really great work in showing how you can take somebody with diabetes, basically without medication, take them off and reverse the course of the disease. There's a lot of research on traumatic brain injury. I have sort of this ideal or dream that someday there's going to be on the sidelines of sports, especially hockey, football, some of these high collision sports, instead of Gatorade, which is sugar, which is yes, it's totally fine for performance for people who are doing really high explosive stuff, but putting ketones into that drink, even if it was in addition to the Gatorade, would be so beneficial at preventing all of the problems that we see with concussions and brain injury in sports, let alone all car accidents. There's tons of other ways this could be applied. Neurodegenerative disease is another big one where I can't even estimate how many people have sent us messages saying hey, we used your products, MCT oil, ketone specifically, and it's we got a couple years back of my dad or my grandpa or stuff like that. That's been the most ridiculous thing. It's people's brains being able to access again. So there's a lot of different things that we can do. And I think we're finding out sort of by the week how many different areas of health this can do. And again, I don't think it's a magic. I don't think it's a magic pill. I think that it's sort of a reversal of just. I mean, you have to cut out one of the major things with what's ruining people's health now, which is refined carbohydrates and sugars. What I think is unfortunate about a keto, it's why I sort of in Keto Answers, I talk a lot about keto plus, sort of how I call it, which is a real food keto based nutrition. Which like if you still eat industrial processed seed oils and have a high amount of linoleic acid and arachidonic acid in your diet, you can have still a lot of the same metabolic problems and not see a lot of the benefits. So people, they say, I lost some weight, feeling okay, but then hit this major plateau, still feeling inflammation. All these problems are still cropping up. It's generally because they're not avoiding vegetable oil still.
Yeah.
Happens. What's great is that a lot of times people, there's sort of a spectrum of vegetable oils, and like I think nobody should be eating any of them. But if you look at sort of cold oils, is how I think about them, like just out of the bottle, they're already oxidized and can wreak havoc in your body. All the way to the other end of the spectrum is breading and coating something like a fried chicken at like a KFC or something like that. And so you're heating up this oil hundreds of times. It can increase the oxidation rate dramatically and create far more trans fats. And then you're also getting on top of that the weird breading and whatever they would put in that stuff. And so people are generally, when they go in keto, they're removing a lot of fried foods. And so I think that you're getting a lot of benefit from that. But a lot of times, this whole dirty keto sort of thing that people say, if it fits your macros, it doesn't matter. I mean, I think it's totally bogus. And that when people generally have problems, sticking points, removing that vegetable oil is a huge, huge benefit to get where they want to go. So sort of a long-winded answer of.
No, I'm in total agreement on that. And, that's really why I like to be in a state of ketosis. I'm not always in ketosis, but I do it for brain and energy. I just feel so mentally clear. I feel so energetic. I don't need a nap. I just feel really, really energized all day long. I sleep better and deeper. So that's why I do it. And like you were talking about, just even using, I know there was a 2008 study where they tested these individuals with cognitive impairment, Alzheimer's, in a nursing home. And they did a test and they got their baseline score. And then they gave them MCT oil for, I believe it was 90 days. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that study. That's all they added was a little bit of MCT oil in their food. They were still eating, nursing home food, which is not healthy. They weren't really fully in a state of nutritional ketosis, but the MCTs help stimulate, they turn into ketones quickly. So they had the presence of some ketones in their bloodstream. Then they retested them with this cognitive scoring and they were improved. The people that took this were improved compared to the placebo. So that's where even just taking a simple product like what you guys make.
Yeah, I think it was only 30 grams, which is nothing, like 2 tablespoons, basically.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, that's why like a lot of these things too, like you can get some of the benefits without switching entirely on it. And like you said, you do it most of the time. I do it, I don't know, whenever I want, sort of. And it's like when I'm working out more and I'm more active, I eat a little bit more carbohydrates and sort of real food form. So I eat, sweet potatoes, berries, things like that. When I'm not, like today's a really long work day and have a lot of stuff going on, a lot of calls and meetings, especially, I ate a bunch of cacao butter in the morning. And we can talk about like why I choose cacao butter. But I haven't eaten since then. It's 2:30 p.m. here now, and I feel totally fine. Like I'm not hungry. And I think that's like I use it as a targeted thing for my brain now as well.
Yeah, it's performance fuel.
Totally, and like disease prevention for me as well. Like I have a lot of cancer in my family, and really trying to mitigate away from that using this.
Absolutely. So why cacao butter?
Cacao butter has, so I'm starting to really geek out on fatty acids in general and fatty acid metabolism. And I mean, I truly just think like the majority of our health problems are really down to overconsumption of linoleic acid. But on the flip side, it seems to show that like stearic acid is basically the complete reverse of linoleic acid.
Now, linoleic acid is a omega-6. Basically, it's got 2 double bonds in it. It's 18 carbon chain, 2 double bonds. It's really common in your nuts and seeds, grains, really common in that. Of course, corn oils, soybean oils, when we see all that kind of stuff. Just want to preface this for the listener.
You need a very, very, very small amount of it, like 0.3 to 1% of intake, but it is naturally occurring in almost all foods anyway, which is totally fine. So for instance, in animal products, it's at 0 to 3% in ruminants. But in pig and chicken products, for example, who are fed soybeans and corn and all this different stuff. They're monogastric animals just like us that can't turn fats into saturated fatty acids in their stomach like cows do. And so that goes into their fatty tissue. And then now modern pigs and chickens are at like 25 to 30% linoleic acid, which is insane. I mean, they should be at like 2. But stearic acid is C18, like with completely saturated carbon bonds. It's a saturated fat, and it's really high in suet, and with a kidney fat, and ruminants it's like, it's just harder to get that, but in cacao butter as well, it's like 35-40% of cacao butter. So I seem to have a insane appetite suppressing sort of signaling thing going on with when I eat stearic acid. So I'll have like 15 to 20 grams of cacao butter, which, and it usually has like a little bit of MCT. So I had MCT and collagen before my workout at noon, but other than that, I haven't consumed anything else. And that amount of stearic acid in the cacao butter seems to just like completely wipe out any sort of cravings or hunger that I have until later in the day. I mean, I don't recommend that people just do this and fast all the time, but it's just sort of an interesting way that I can like, otherwise, if not, I can fast for a couple of days, but it's still a little distracting to me. And I won't always be like as mentally sharp, or I'll be thinking about food a little bit here and there and have to sort of push it out of my brain. But having a little bit of stearic acid in the form of cacao butter, I've gotten it sort of as a raw thing too. It's almost impossible to use. So I just do the cacao butter. Yeah, I just feel great doing it.
How about like a beef tallow or a grass-fed butter? Are they rich in
Yeah,
stearic acid as well?
it's like 5 to 10%, depending on the source. So suet's like 30%. Cacao butter is like 30-35%. Coconut oil is a little higher as well. I think like between 10 to 15. I don't have to check, but yeah, like other animal fats aren't as high. And I think it has to do with sort of like the integrity needed in the fat. And so, for example, if it's a more visceral fat or around muscles, it needs to be more fluid, where in the fat needs to move around a little bit more.
Yeah.
Whereas when it's like around the kidney and in suet, it's basically protecting that organ from getting
insulating. Yeah.
And so it needs to be a little bit harder. And so that's why, I mean, the sort of evolution has made it so that this sort of more stable C18 fat is in that fat.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And let's talk about like, what do you think the biggest mistakes? I mean, you mentioned vegetable oils. What are the biggest mistakes people are making when they try to go low carb keto?
I think it's not ramping up their electrolytes enough is a huge one.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I'm drinking right now is a massive amount of electrolytes. And I think that you begin to understand after you are depleted for a while and then add a bunch in, this is how I should be feeling. I think a lot of the keto flu symptoms are actually due to low electrolytes, just because your insulin falls for the first time in 30 years and your body excretes all these electrolytes. And so you just need to eat way more than you think. And that's a big one. And the big one is, I think, like, just having it be this sort of, and I know we have recipes as well that people are going to make them, but doing this dirty keto is it's a big mistake. And like, if you want to create a bridge and like people want to go to eating real food, that's great. But just like eating like ridiculously processed stuff because it has low carb does not mean it's healthy. And this is sort of like the thing where, like, oh, it's gluten-free, whatever, like super processed crackers or cookies or whatever, so it must be healthy and good for me. I see a lot of that same stuff popping up now after a couple of years after this big keto explosion, because I think people sort of want to rationalize having these things that they're used to eating. And I understand, like, everybody can't afford stuff that's local and seasonal, doesn't have access to it, but there is obviously some abusing of just trying to eat as many ridiculous low carb things as possible. And I think that's just a huge mistake long term.
Yeah, dirty keto example of that would be like, you go to Wendy's or McDonald's or something like that, and you get a hamburger without the bun. You have bacon on it, and then you've got the side salad with like a whole bunch of ranch dressing on there.
Right. So you have soybean oil,
low fat, low carb, high fat, but it's just full of toxins.
Yeah, exactly. And like the biggest thing, again, I just keep going back to like the linoleic acid and the polyunsaturated fatty acids, is those things get stored into your cell membranes. And this is why, like, I think that they're worse than sugar. Sugar, you metabolize it and it's gone. And yes, it can do some damaging things over the course of many, many years. But when you eat something, it literally becomes a part of you for like 2 to 3 years. You are living with that meal for 2 to 3 years, whether you like it or not. And you can test this. Like you can test how much of your fat is made of linoleic acid and arachidonic acid. And for a lot of people, it's way too high. It's far too high.
Yeah, and so when it's linoleic acid, it's promoting a lot of these inflammatory gene pathways in the system. And when you don't have enough omega 3s in the cell, you also get really, really hard, rigid cells. But if you have too much polyunsaturated, you actually you get very fluid cells that are too weak and they're more susceptible to viral infections. So you got to have that right ratio of the fluid fats like omega 3s and your omega 6s, and then the stable fats like your saturated fats, like you were talking about.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, say like, it operates as a signaling molecule. Like when you start losing fat and you're burning that fat, a lot of people feel a spike of inflammation and really awful. And it's because basically you're liberating these fats that are really unstable and they're becoming oxidized in your body and creating this inflammatory cascade.
Yeah, for sure. And so let's talk about the Keto Answers book. How did that come about?
So we had a podcast of the same name, and we just had on tons of experts, and I think we did like 70 plus episodes, 80 episodes, something like that. And it was compiling. I mean, no matter how much information we put out via content on our website and a podcast, I was still getting questions all the time, asking me all these things. And so I'd already written a draft for a keto book, and it basically spun it into and cut it up into, so you can still read it front to back, but structure it in a way where you can go to index, and all the questions that you would ever have about a ketogenic diet are structured so that way you can just flip to a page. If you want to know, is keto okay for a breastfeeding woman or whatever, you can go to that page and read sort of what I've researched about it with like all of the science. And so it's just sort of like my way to direct people to something else other than like having to answer questions one by one, which I still get a bunch of, but now I can at least direct them to the book. But yeah, I mean, it was like after the content and the podcast and the book, it's like I really don't think there's that much more to be covered about keto anymore. And I think that it's great that like people are still finding out about it, and a lot of people are trying it out for the first time. But it's like I think that the information is sort of out there at this point.
Yeah, and I can just try to understand in my head when you name a podcast Keto Answers podcast, how many questions you probably got. So yeah, enough to write a book about. Absolutely. And now you've shifted it to the natural state. And what inspired that?
I mean, sort of like how I was talking about before regarding how I sort of view health holistically. And I think that the natural state of any organism is health and being healthy. And you go outside and you can observe this. Unless you're at a zoo, every other thing that is living is sort of in its natural state. I mean, I guess like pigeons and rats and stuff like that in New York, not. But like if you go out into nature and you look around, you see things that are abundantly healthy. Like no organism has to try to be healthy. This is something that I think people just, they're not connected to nature, and they don't understand that being unhealthy is completely abnormal.
Yeah.
And that if you're just in a natural environment, if you're a squirrel running around in trees, like if I were to go outside and look around and see a squirrel that like was coughing and was like 3 times the size as it should be versus another squirrel, I would say, what the hell just happened to this? Like, what is going on? Like something's wrong right now. And like nobody asks these questions anymore because we've normalized being sick. And I think that if we were also, like if a baby was born, thrown it into the woods, had to gather and hunt its own food, there would be effortless health. And we see this in indigenous populations. There is no need to, like, obviously like trauma and things like that. Yes, we want Western medicine for those things. If I get hit by that same bus I was talking about earlier, like I want to be put back together for sure. But when you're looking at chronic disease, like health, energy, things like this, mental health especially, these things are absent in our environment now because our environment is so artificial. And so looking at sort of like, I was unpacking, like, why is this the case? Like, how have we gotten so far away from a normal environment? And how do we sort of like still live in a 21st century, culture and society, and like not be the guy who has to like go grow a ponytail and go live out in the woods by himself? But like, how do we still live in this world while getting back some of these things about a natural state. So that way health can be effortless. And I don't have to make all these decisions all the time around what I need to do, what I need to eat, blah, 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 blah. Like it's overwhelming. There's too many decisions to make to have, there's no one can survive in that. Like right now, like if I were to like make a list of all the things that if you were just think about things you have to do, it's paralyzing. But if you set up your environment at your home, your life, your lifestyle, things change dramatically and become way easier. And so it's sort of like my interest in that and exploring that. And again, like I had covered keto incessantly. Keto is just one tool in nutrition, and nutrition is just one of the things in like that should be in that natural state environment that I'm talking about. And so, I think about this stuff all the time. So to have a podcast just limited to one tool and one section of like how I view health, just to me seems like really limiting.
Yeah, totally. I totally get you on that. And guys, you definitely should check out his podcast, Natural State Podcast. Really good stuff that he goes over on that. Let's talk about the perfect keto bars. I know there's a lot. If you walk into any sort of store, Whole Foods or any sort of store now, there are, like 100 different types of bars. All of them, have some sort of marketing angle. So what inspired you to create a new bar, particularly a keto bar?
Yeah. So after we did a lot of supplements with Perfect Keto to help people with the ketogenic diet, things like the MCT oil, ketones, things like that, I sort of like wanted to use it as a way to think about like what are the things that people are still eating that are ruining their health mostly, and with frequency and volume. And it seemed to me, and like don't have any good options or alternatives right now. So if somebody goes to a grocery store, what can they not buy, but they're buying a lot of that is just destroying their health? And for me, that it was bars, like nutrition bars. And like this is like a lot of surveying, asking people that were trying to do like they wanted convenience, they wanted to have something in between meals, on the go. So they would grab like a Kind bar or something like that, or like even some of the other ones. Like I think we tested a bunch of bars, like as we were seeing, like ones that claimed low carb, like Bulletproof, and some of these other bars like that. Yeah, they're using these fibers in there that are fiber syrups that are basically just like sugar syrups. And I put a video out about this, that every single bar that I tried spiked my blood sugar after I ate it. I was using a CGM, a continuous blood glucose monitor, to, from 80 to 180 for 2, 3, 4 hours from eating one bar, like a 45-gram bar.
Wow.
And so completely destructive for people who are trying to reverse metabolic dysfunction, not be diabetic, not be obese, not have neurological problems or cancer, et cetera. Like this is a huge problem. Like people don't understand and this is why I think that, the company's now doing a really good job at this. Levels is one of them that is sort of popularizing CGM and getting it to people without prescription, so they can start getting this feedback loop of when I eat this food, this is happening inside my body. I don't think blood sugar spikes are necessarily all that bad for people who are generally have a healthy baseline. But if you're trying to fix a lot of these problems, you do not want to have your blood sugar be going all over the place all the time. And so there was literally not one bar that we tried from unhealthy to healthy and all the way in between, dozens of them, that didn't spike your blood sugar. So we tried to make one, and it was a pain to do so. Like it took us 18 iterations over the course of, I think, almost 2 years. And we had to end up developing a special tapioca fiber, to not basically act like a sugar in your body and be a fiber that can hold something together. There's so much stuff about food science that I've learned now that people demand. There's industry standard about how things look, taste, and perform. So you sort of need to match that. And for a bar, you need to get a bunch of ingredients and basically glue them together. And most people use like a rice syrup or agave or honey or whatever, which for people trying to do a ketogenic diet or try to fix some of these issues that we're talking about is really not a good solution. So it was just about making a clean label product that people can have, and it's not going to be subtractive to their health. So it was, as with all the stuff that we've made, we've sort of had to like go to all these food scientists and manufacturers, and like we try to do stuff ourselves, but no one had done it before in a way that was as good or better than a previous bar or cookie or some of the other products that we're working on currently. And so like trying to shift the food industry to say, like, hey, people want this. We need to make this. And then there's a lot of people who did it in a lazy way, who are trying to capitalize on the keto trend and just make something that, looks on a supplement or nutrition facts panel like it fits the macros of a ketogenic diet. But then when you try them and they say they're keto, spikes your blood sugar, takes you out of ketosis. So, I mean, this is where like we want to solve the problem for people, making ketosis easier. Like, to do that would be really unauthentic. I wanted products that I could use. And so having an actual quality bar and a standard is like, it's just extremely rare in this industry. And so many people are in it for profit and for just trying to make a quick buck, unfortunately, I'm sure you know. And I mean, this is the reason why we're not in Whole Foods right now, is that it's really expensive to make a really high quality bar, and people are used to paying certain prices for it. What people don't understand is that you have to pay basically 30 to 50% of your product to the stores to have that store carry. So there's a broker, there's a distributor, there's a retailer, et cetera. Everybody needs their cut. And you basically should go into a grocery store and think, okay, this is basically a filter of the food that's in here has to be cheap for the economics to work. Like, it has to be low quality essentially, or like even if you go into like, I mean, this applies to vegetables and things like that as well. It's like these have to sort of be mass produced in order to fit the bill of what people are used to paying, which is really unfortunate. I don't think that will never be in there, because I think at scale we've gotten our prices down, and we're doing a lot of stuff to work on that. But it's really challenging when like you're doing that. You're also trying to run a business that, we put all the cash back into the business to put up more content, to do education, to serve the community. And it's tough to run a business and give all your money away to people who are not really providing any value.
Yeah, for sure. And you know what I love about the bars, not only do they taste great, but I also don't get digestive issues. I have a past history of irritable bowel issues. And so there are certain fibers that prebiotics that my body just does not tolerate well. And on top of that, I like the fact that you guys actually tested it with the continuous blood glucose monitor. Most people don't really realize how important that is, because again, it's not really about macros. There are certain things that are listed as fibers that don't impact your blood sugar, and there are other things that are listed as fibers that will spike your blood sugar. And you were actually testing through all of that. And we're able to design these so that way they didn't spike your blood sugar. Now, you also made the Perfect Keto cookie. And, I know we're both huge fans of real food, but every now and then having a nice little treat. And, in American society, we absolutely love cookies. And so you guys did the same thing with the continuous blood glucose for that. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, cookies are another thing where, again, if we didn't launch them, people are still going to eat them. And you look at how many people took up baking when they were in quarantine over the last however many months. Like, people are going to eat these things no matter what. And like, of course, I want to be pushing people towards eating all real foods. But again, like, we have a culture that people are used to eating the stuff they want it. And again, I didn't think that there was a good option. So everything else that was out there before we did ours was, to have something bake and for it to lift up and perform like an actual cookie, you need to typically use a bunch of sugar alcohols, which is usually irritates people's guts, like you were saying before with the bars. And so it's either you have a real cookie that has a bunch of refined sugar, wheat, and like really crazy processed weird stuff in most of the grocery store items, or you go to like a low carb cookie and it's so packed with sugar alcohols that you get this cooling effect in your mouth. It doesn't taste like a cookie, but then you also get gut issues on the back end of it. So our sort of path was, how do we make something that fits this need of people wanting sort of a sweet treat or some sort of dessert where it tastes as good as a regular cookie and isn't sort of like this health food. When people see like, oh, there's like health food, it's like what my grandma who has diabetes should eat. They never make that switch to trying the healthier product. So like, I think of it sort of like as Elon Musk thinks of electric car, not just like, okay, if we want people to switch to electric cars, we can't just make an electric car. We need to make the best car ever. And that's how we sort of think about our product development as well. As like, if we don't make the best product, it doesn't matter if it's healthy or not, people aren't going to choose it. And so we sort of like think about that. Like, how do we want it to taste? How do we want it to, how do we want the mouthfeel to be? How do we want it to look after it's done? And of course, like, how do we have it sort of be contained within the parameter of real food, not spiking your blood sugar and keeping you in ketosis? And all of those things are really, really hard to combine and optimize for. Like I think that you could do the low blood sugar thing and not use real food ingredients just fine. Then you do like the real ingredients and have it spike your blood sugar just fine. So like combining those things and having both of those standards makes it really, really challenging. But we're pretty stubborn and have high standards. So it took us, again, it was like over a year and a half of R&D. But I think that obviously I'm biased, but I think that the best sort of like keto dessert or treat out there right now.
Yeah, I would agree. They're a great product. And for those of you guys listening, if you haven't tried them, definitely do. We'll have a link in the show notes and a discount coupon you can check out as well. Let's talk about your favorite foods. So let's, a day in the life, let's say like your top 5 favorite foods. If you could only live on 5 foods, what would it be?
Oh man, it'd be very meat centric. For sure, like either like a beef rib or a ribeye, like a fatty cut of red meat. Anything elk. I'm a huge elk fan. I'm going on my first elk hunt this fall. Super excited about that. I'm not picky. Like I think mussels or oysters, like especially fresh, would be high up there. Avocados are always nice. And if I had to pick a 5th, maybe just to balance it out. So I have 3 animal products, 2 animal products, and avocado. I'd have to do like a super simple, like 100% dark chocolate.
There you go.
Just to have all the bases covered.
There you go. Sounds good. How about a day in the life? I know you're obviously a busy entrepreneur. You're not married, are you?
Engaged. So
engaged.
Soon.
Congratulations.
Yep. But we had some issues with logistics this year. So
yeah. So you had to postpone.
Yeah. So we're trying to figure out what's going to work, but no issue.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk about a day in the life. Well, what does it look like? What time are you waking up? What's your morning routine? And take us through a day.
Yeah, wake up probably 6:30. Negotiables, my morning routine, which would be meditation and journaling. And I think that those 2 things, especially if I can get a journaling in at the end of the night and sort of like a reflection time to sort of book on the day, is really, really effective. Just to sort of like have a foundation to the day. I think that with everything in life, like I said before, like there's so many things going on that's easy to get distracted. And have that grounding moment where you decide what you want to get done that day, or you reflect on the day and say, okay, did I get done what I wanted to do? Like, did I live my life how I wanted to be? Did I spend time with family or friends, if that's what you're into, or whatever? Like having some intention allows you to sort of step out of this crazy rapids of life that we have. Like the current of life is so intense that if you don't do some of these things, like I have so many peers and people that I know, like people that I've seen, like after 3, 6, 12 months look back and they have no idea what they're doing with their life or what just happened because they're not having these sort of short check-in times. So like those 2 things are really, really critical for me. But I've been trying to, after those times, just work, like since quarantine came, also like just work way less. I've been, like I said before, like it's sort of been at this pace since high school of just working way too much. And while I wouldn't trade everything that I've gotten done, or like sort of like all the skills that I've developed and where I'm at in life, like I think regret not spending more time with people, and sort of like just as I'm getting older, like relationships matter way more. It's just like when the world seems like it's falling apart, I think you just reflect a little bit more on what actually matters. And if everything fell apart and we all had to move out to the woods, it's like society is unraveling. Like I think a good day would look like waking up, having food, having a good meal, spending time with people you were around, and like enjoying being outside. And so these are sort of things like, why don't I just have that all the time now? And so in the morning, trying to get up for a walk and be outside with my fiance or with friends, like in a morning walk. Usually I would just go straight into work mode and go intense. But now I've sort of shifted that and making sure that, like, again, sort of like bookends of the day in between work or like sandwiching work is spending time with people, ideally outside. And in Austin right now, that looks like melting slowly into a big puddle.
It's the middle of the summer at the time we're doing this interview. So yeah, it's hot. In Georgia, it is too. Super humid out here.
Yeah. And so that is something that's new for me. So like, again, I'm always trying to like reevaluate what my day looks like, but spending time with people and then tackling uncomfortable work stuff first. Like I sort of like think about deep work by Cal Newport is a big book that's influenced me around just blocking out time when I work first thing in the day instead of answering emails and getting to all the busy work that is an infinite amount in everybody's day. Like blocking off 1 to 3, 4 hours maybe and doing things that are the most uncomfortable and hardest for me. And then getting into all the catch up stuff. Try to squeeze a work in before 1 o'clock usually, because again, the heat here is so brutal. But yeah, pretty basic for me. Nothing too crazy.
No, it's good stuff. You're really working on balancing your life, which is so important. And I do the same. Spend a lot of time with my wife and my kids, and it's so rewarding. So, what are you most excited about? You've obviously built several different companies now. Perfect Keto is doing great. What are you excited about? What are you working on right now that you think is really innovative? Because you have a real innovative mind. So, I'm really interested in that.
Yeah, so I'm sort of like I like to follow my curiosities and really go deep. And I think that for me, for a while, it was sports injuries, maximizing athletics. Then it was functional medicine stuff. Then it was building an online business and all this stuff that comes with it, keto, et cetera. And now I'm sort of like shifting far more into again, like how do we create a real food system where regenerative agriculture in a way of farming that actually is
Mm.
beneficial for people, but also the planet. Like, how do we shift this to be more of a normal thing? So I have a lot of stuff that I'm thinking about and working on here, sort of under wraps right now. But you'll be the first to know
Yeah.
when stuff comes out. But yeah, I mean, working on basically trying to make buying real food easy and affordable for people. So that way, it's sort of like this whole spectrum is covered. Like again, I said, like I want to create bridges for people to get from eating a standard American diet to eating local, seasonal, real foods. I think there's a lot of things people can do sort of in the middle. I think there's a huge part on the right side of that bridge of getting people from eating like healthy packaged food like we're making now. Like there's still a huge gap of people going from that step to eating actual real food that they can like know their farmers and their farmers are doing a good job and all this stuff. So there's a lot on that end that I'm exploring now that is really fascinating to me that I can't stop researching.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to having you back on down the road when you get a little further along with that. Regenerative agriculture is a phenomenal topic, and there's a lot we can do with that. And so I'm glad that you're passionate about that because you clearly have. And I want to acknowledge the fact that you have such an innovative mind, great work ethic, and you get stuff done. Clearly, in the last 8 years since you got out of school, you've done quite a bit and you've really helped benefit so many people when it comes to their health and just really have helped shift this natural health industry. So appreciate all the great work that you're doing, and thanks for joining us on the podcast.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. And for those of you guys that are out there, remember, you're more valuable than you think you are. So start taking action on what you learned today. And I guarantee it's going to start improving your life and your health. Be blessed, everybody. We'll see you on a future podcast.